What happens when powerful bigots don't get their way and don't think that they'll ever have to face consequences for their actions? On a November morning in 1978, Dan White snuck past metal detectors at San Francisco City Hall and assassinated his colleagues, Mayor Moscone and Harvey Milk. Now, nearly 50 years later, Republican members of Congress are refusing to pass through metal detectors at the U.S. Capitol so they can bring their guns to work. Hey, it's Matt. I make videos about queer history as seen on TV and film, and as someone who spends a lot of time reading about the past, lately I've been feeling some very uncomfortable déjà vu. So I think it might be a good time to look back at what happened in San Francisco in the 70s and see if there are any lessons for today. And a quick note, I'm going to be using clips from two excellent sources that I recommend: the fantastic documentary The Times of Harvey Milk and the 2008 film Milk. If you want to watch either of those, I have a link in the description to where you can find them streaming, and also a link to my Patreon. So, Harvey Milk. We know him now as a radical queer leader in San Francisco in the 70s, but before that, he was just some guy who owned a camera store and was popular with the neighbors. At the time, the Castro was an up-and-coming neighborhood, and as a resident and a store owner, Harvey was frustrated that the growing queer population of the Castro didn't have a voice at City Hall. So he ran for office, and failed, pretty badly. But he made some allies. He got some attention, he learned some lessons, and so he ran again. And again, and again. One reason he kept losing was because the city did what's called at-large elections. That means the whole city voted for the Board of Supervisors, rather than each neighborhood getting their own pick. That system allowed the city's longtime majority, straight white men, to basically control City Hall. A gay candidate didn't really stand a chance. But then, in 1977, San Francisco switched to district elections, and suddenly, the Castro got to choose their own candidate, and it was Harvey in a landslide. That also meant big wins for other minorities who'd always been shut out. It was the most diverse Board of Supervisors in history that year. The first self-described women's rights advocate, the first Chinese-American supervisor, the first black woman, and then there was Dan White. Dan was a former cop who was elected with strong support from the San Francisco Police Union. His district was described by the New York Times as largely white, middle class, and, quote, hostile to the homosexual community. Dan ran as a defender of family and religious life against homosexuals. He pledged to take the city back from, quote, radicals, social deviants, and incorrigibles, unquote, and told his followers that there were, quote, thousands of frustrated, angry people, such as yourselves, waiting to unleash a fury that will eradicate the malignancies which blight our beautiful city, unquote. That intensity sounds a lot like the rhetoric that we might hear from the right today. Harvey, in contrast, said that almost everything he did with an eye to the gay movement. So, as you can imagine, Dan and Harvey clashed on some issues. White quickly ran into trouble in office. He got frustrated with the job, and after less than a year, he resigned. He said he didn't like city politics and that he wasn't getting paid enough, so much for unleashing a fury. But then, a few days after he resigned, he changed his mind and asked for his job back. The mayor was like, no, so Dan took matters into his own hands. The morning that Mayor Moscone was going to announce Dan's replacement, Dan slipped a revolver into his pocket, along with 10 bullets. City Hall had just installed metal detectors, so he didn't go through the main entrance. He slipped around to the side and climbed in through a window, so he could bring the gun with him. He went to the mayor's office first. They argued. Dan shot him. Then Dan went to Harvey's office and assassinated him too. Then Dan drove to the police station where he used to work and turned himself in. Harvey's body was found by the president of the Board of Supervisors, Dianne Feinstein.
As president of the Board of Supervisors, it's my duty to make this announcement. Both Mayor Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk have been shot and killed.
After he turned himself in, Dan White had the full support of the San Francisco Police Department. They fundraised for his defense, about $100,000, and cops wore shirts that said, "Free Dan White." He was found guilty, but he was only sentenced to a couple of years in prison. We think of San Francisco as a pretty friendly city for queer people, but that was certainly not the case back then. Back then, queer people were still just starting to gain a little bit of political power. And the old guard, the straight white male machine that was used to running City Hall year after year until that election, didn't like what was changing. I'm telling you this story because even though it was a long time ago, it has echoes today. I'm recording this video a week after the U.S. Capitol started requiring members of Congress to pass through metal detectors, following a violent attempt by right-wing extremists to take over Congress. Extremists who were encouraged by conservative politicians. Politicians who told their followers that their power was being taken away. Bigots lashing out over an election that didn't go their way. And now, how are those conservative politicians responding to having to go through metal detectors? They're refusing. They're refusing to stop when they set them off. They're bragging about bringing guns into the Capitol. This all sounds like a story we've heard before, and I just hope Dianne Feinstein doesn't have to go through this again.